I am Cale Thornwick, a worker in the sprawling manufactorums deep within Hive Tertius on Mordian 7th. Understand that when I speak of love here, I refer to something profoundly fragile and desperate. A fleeting bloom in the gaps between patrol routes, withering quickly under the relentless weight of constant surveillance. This narrative offers no grand romance or tales of noble sacrifice. Instead, it chronicles two individuals striving to discover warmth in a world long stripped of its meaning. Here, in sublevel Theta 9, the air is thick with the tang of recycled breath and metallic dust. 37 floors above, beneath the spire's gleaming facade, nobles indulge in their intricate games of politics and pleasure. Down here, however, we forge the very bolts that bind their gilded world together. The manufactorum floor itself is a sprawling expanse, stretching for kilometers in every direction. An unyielding maze of perpetually moving conveyor belts, thunderous stamping presses, and relentless assembly stations that never fall silent. A constant rhythmic pounding permeates everything, transforming into the very heartbeat of one's existence. After 18 years toiling here, I no longer register it as mere noise. It has simply become the inescapable cadence of life itself. It was 3 months ago, during the mid-shift rotation, that I first encountered Mira Castellan. She navigated the quality control stations with an improbable grace, a stark contrast to the brutal grind of machinery and the unforgiving glare of the lamps. Her dark hair, strictly gathered in the prescribed regulation style, revealed the slender, pale line of her neck rising above her standard work coveralls. When her gaze lifted from her data slate, her eyes held a quality I hadn't witnessed in years. It wasn't exactly hope, but rather a profound, quiet defiance against the relentless, crushing weight of our shared existence. The Imperium drills into us that love is a luxury we cannot afford. Personal attachments are deemed weaknesses that undermine devotion to the Emperor. They foster dependencies that compromise efficiency and breed the kind of individualistic thinking that invariably leads to heresy. These doctrines are etched into our very being from the moment we can walk, constantly reinforced through daily prayers, stringent work quotas, and the ever-present threat of re-education. Yet somehow, defying all logic and personal safety, I found my thoughts drifting to her during the long, monotonous hours of assembly line work. Our shift commences precisely at 0400 hours, when the harsh klaxons blare their awakening call throughout the hab blocks. By 0430, we are at our designated stations, heads bowed for the daily recitation of the litany of work. In toil, we find purpose. We chant in unison, our voices echoing off the metal ceiling. In purpose, we find the Emperor's will. In the Emperor's will, we find our salvation. The words taste like ash on my tongue, but they are essential. The omnipresent servo skulls, drifting silently above, record every detail, their mechanical eyes perpetually scanning for any hint of insufficient devotion. Mira works at Station Gamma 7, meticulously checking bolt tolerances and documenting variance reports. Her supervisor is a grizzled woman named Overseer Valdris, who earned her position through 40 years of flawless service and an unwavering dedication to Imperial doctrine. Valdris watches her workers with the predatory intensity of a hunting hawk, scrutinizing every pause, every glance, every potential moment of inefficiency. Under her watchful gaze, conversation is minimal and strictly confined to work-related matters. But there are brief, fleeting moments, small windows between the supervisory rounds, when words can be exchanged. During one such instance, as I delivered a crate of finished bolt heads to her station, Mira looked up from her cogitator screen and spoke. "The tolerance variances have been increasing," she said, her voice barely audible above the machinery's din. "Batch 77 Alpha shows microfractures in the threading." I nodded, understanding instantly. This was not merely about bolt tolerances. It was about us, about the careful distance we maintained, the professional facade that barely concealed something deeper. The microfractures she spoke of were within ourselves, the minute breaks in our conditioning that permitted forbidden thoughts to take root. "I'll check the stamping pressure settings," I replied, meeting her gaze for just a fleeting moment. After shift ends. After shift ends. Those words resonated with a weight far beyond their surface meaning. After shift signified the brief window of semi-freedom before the mandatory rest cycle. It meant navigating the curfew patrols and the ubiquitous surveillance networks that monitored every movement through the hab blocks. It meant finding ways to exist as something more than mere productive units in the Emperor's grand machine. The curfew begins at 2200 hours and lasts until 0400. During these 6 hours, movement through the hive is restricted to essential personnel only. Workers returning from late shifts, maintenance crews, and the ever-present Adeptus Arbites patrols. The streets between the manufactorums and residential blocks transform into canyon-like spaces, filled with deep shadows and the distant hum of atmospheric processors. Lumen strips provide sickly yellow pools of light every 50 meters, creating a checkerboard of visibility and darkness. To meet someone during curfew hours requires meticulous planning. The patrol routes follow predictable patterns, timed to ensure complete coverage while maintaining maximum efficiency. The Arbites move in pairs, their carapace armor gleaming under the artificial lighting, shock mauls hanging ready at their belts. These enforcers are not cruel, they are merely thorough. They understand that order demands constant vigilance, that even the smallest deviation from protocol can spiral into chaos. But patterns can be learned, timing can be memorized, and love, it seems, compels people to take extraordinary risks. The drinking establishment I chose was called the Rust Crown, located in a converted storage bay 3 levels down from my hab unit. It wasn't officially a bar, as recreational alcohol consumption required permits rarely granted to manufacturing personnel. Instead, it existed in the gray space of imperial bureaucracy, technically classified as a nutritional supplement dispensary that conveniently served fermented grain beverages alongside the mandatory protein rations. The proprietor was an ancient man named Jorik, who had lost his left arm in a plasma conduit explosion 20 years earlier. The mechanical replacement that clicked and whirred when he moved was a masterwork of mechanicus engineering, all brass fittings and exposed servo motors. He had served as a tech adept before his injury forced him into civilian life, and he understood the careful balance between adhering to regulations and allowing people the small comforts that made existence bearable. "The usual, Thornwick?" he asked when I arrived at 2147 hours, 13 minutes before curfew began. His mechanical fingers clinked against the metal surface of the bar as he reached for a bottle of something that might generously be called ale. "2," I said quietly. "I'm expecting someone." Horrick's human eyes studied me for a long moment. The mechanical one, a red lens set into his scarred socket, whirred softly as it focused. Expecting someone during curfew hours was dangerous. It implied planning, coordination, the kind of personal relationships that drew unwanted attention. "The temperature control has been irregular lately," Yorick said finally, filling 2 ceramic cups with the pale liquid. "People have been coming in to warm up, Nothing unusual about that. I nodded, understanding. If questioned, we were simply two workers seeking shelter from the artificially regulated atmosphere. Random encounters, not planned meetings. The distinction was subtle, but legally significant. Mira arrived 17 minutes after curfew began. I heard her footsteps on the metal grating outside before the door cycled open, admitting a swirl of recycled air and the distant sound of machinery. She moved quickly, her regulation work boots making soft clicking sounds against the floor. Her eyes swept the dimly lit space before settling on me, and something in her expression relaxed. "The heating in Hab Block 7 is malfunctioning again," she said, loud enough for Yorick to hear, then quieter. "I thought I might not make it. There's an extra patrol on level 15 tonight." I pushed the second cup toward her, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she lifted it. The fermented grain brew was bitter and thin, but it was warm, and warmth was a precious commodity in the deep levels of the hive. "Equipment failures seem to be increasing," I replied, maintaining the fiction. "Perhaps the Mechanicus needs to perform more thorough maintenance rituals." We spoke like this for nearly an hour, our conversation layered with double meanings and careful omissions. To any listening devices, we were simply two workers discussing operational concerns and seeking temporary shelter. But beneath the surface, we were mapping the territories of each other's thoughts, finding the places where our carefully constructed facades showed cracks. Mira had been born in the mid-levels, the daughter of a scribe who served the local administrative office. Her childhood had been spent among data slates and filing systems, learning to navigate the endless bureaucracy that kept the hive functioning. But a clerical error in her educational placement had sent her to the manufacturing levels, instead of allowing her to continue in administrative service. She spoke of it without bitterness, but I could hear the loss in her voice, the life she might have lived, surrounded by books and knowledge, instead of metal and noise. "I sometimes wonder what it would be like," she said, staring into her cup, "to work with living things instead of machines, growing food, maybe, or tending animals, places where things change and grow instead of just wearing down." Such thoughts bordered on dangerous territory. The Imperium's vast cities were built on the principle that humanity's role was to serve the machine of empire, not to engage in primitive agricultural pursuits. But in the dim lighting of the Rust Crown, with the sound of distant machinery muffling our words, such forbidden dreams felt safe to share. "My grandfather told me stories," I said, "about the first settlers on Mordian 7th before the hive cities, when there were still open skies and natural weather patterns. He said the air smelled different then. Clean." Mira looked up from her drink, her eyes meeting mine across the small table. "Do you believe those stories?" "I want to," I admitted. "I want to believe that somewhere, somehow, things were different once." This was perhaps the most heretical thing I had ever said. The imperial truth taught that humanity's current state was the natural and optimal order of existence. To suggest that things had been better in the past, or that they could be different in the future, was to question the fundamental wisdom of the Emperor's design. Yet, saying it to her felt like the most honest thing I had ever done. We left separately, spaced 10 minutes apart, to avoid creating patterns that surveillance systems might detect. Mira went first, disappearing into the maze of corridors that led back toward the residential blocks. I waited, counting my heartbeats, before following a different route that would take me through 3 separate security checkpoints on the way to my HAB unit. The patrols were routine that night. At checkpoint Delta 7, An Arbeits enforcer scanned my work identification and recorded my biometric data. His partner, a woman with the scarred hands of a veteran, asked standard questions about my destination and purpose for being outside during curfew hours. Nutritional supplement dispensary, I replied, showing the receipt Jorik had provided. Regulation compliance for metabolic requirements. The enforcer studied the receipt with professional thoroughness. The rust crown was registered with the appropriate authorities. Its inventory properly cataloged and taxed. Workers were permitted to seek additional nutrition if their shift schedules created metabolic imbalances. Everything was in order, documented, accounted for. Proceed to your designated residential area, the enforcer said, returning my identification. Report any unusual activity to the nearest patrol unit. For the Emperor, I replied, giving the proper response. For the Emperor, she echoed, already turning her attention to the next checkpoint. My HAB unit was a standard arrangement, 3 meters by 4 meters, with a sleeping alcove, basic sanitation facility, and a small preparation area for food rations. The walls were painted in regulation gray, marked only by a standard Imperial Aquila and a data screen that provided shift schedules and administrative announcements. It was identical to thousands of other units throughout the residential blocks, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. But that night, as I lay in the narrow sleeping alcove, the space felt different, changed. The memory of conversation, of shared thoughts and careful glances had transformed it from merely a place of rest into something approaching a home. For the first time in years, I found myself imagining how it might look with small personal touches. A second cup on the preparation counter, clothing that did not belong to me hanging in the storage alcove, the quiet breathing of another person in the darkness. Such thoughts were dangerous, but I could not stop them. They colored my dreams with possibilities that Imperial doctrine would have labeled as heretical self-indulgence. I dreamed of conversations that lasted longer than stolen moments, of walks through corridors where we did not have to pretend to be strangers, of a life where love was not measured against productivity quotas and surveillance reports. The next morning's shift began like any other. The klaxon sounded at 0400. The litany of work echoed through the manufactorum at 0430. The assembly lines resumed their endless rhythm of production. But everything had changed because now I had something to look forward to beyond the completion of each day's quota. Mira was at her station when I arrived with the morning's delivery of raw materials. She looked up from her data slate as I set down the crate, her expression professionally neutral. But there was something in her eyes, a warmth that had not been there before, that made the harsh lighting seem less oppressive. Quality control reports from the night shift, she said, handing me a data wafer. Standard tolerances maintained. I'll pass this along to the production supervisors, I replied, taking the wafer. Our fingers touched briefly as I accepted it. A contact that lasted perhaps half a second, but sent warmth spreading through my chest. That small touch sustained me through 8 hours of assembly line work, through the mechanical repetition of bolt installation and torque verification, through the midday meal of corpse starch and reclaimed water, through the afternoon productivity lecture and the evening shift change procedures. It was a tiny rebellion against the dehumanizing efficiency of our existence, a reminder that we were more than the sum of our labor output. But small rebellions, like seeds in hostile soil, require careful tending to survive. The second meeting was more difficult to arrange. The patrol schedules had been modified, incorporating random elements that made timing unpredictable. Extra security sweeps were being conducted in the industrial sectors, ostensibly as part of routine efficiency audits, but clearly designed to discourage unauthorized gatherings. The Rust Crown remained open, but Jorik had mentioned increased scrutiny from regulatory inspectors. We communicated through the work assignment system, embedding coded messages in routine production reports. Mira would file variance notifications that included timestamp data. I would respond with delivery confirmations that contained location coordinates. To any reviewing administrator, these were simply the mundane communications required for manufacturing operations. But encoded within the numbers and technical specifications were the desperate plans of two people trying to find each other in a maze of restrictions and surveillance. Bolt delivery to Gamma 7 requires special handling procedures, read one of my reports. Recommend quality assessment at 2200 hours. Storage Bay 15. Storage Bay 15 was 2 levels below the Rust Crown, in a section of the hive used for long-term inventory storage. The lighting was minimal, activated only by motion sensors that created pools of illumination as workers passed through. During curfew hours, it would be empty except for the automated systems that monitored environmental conditions and inventory levels. I arrived first, moving carefully through corridors I had mapped during previous shifts. The bay was vast and filled with towering shelves of manufactured goods waiting for transport to other sectors of the hive. Somewhere in the darkness above, servo skulls drifted on silent patrol routes, their mechanical eyes recording everything for later review. But the shelving created blind spots, spaces where two people could stand close enough to speak without being observed. Mira appeared 15 minutes later, moving like a ghost through the shadows between the inventory racks. She wore a maintenance technician's coveralls over her regular clothing, the kind that would justify her presence in restricted areas during curfew hours. Her hair was hidden beneath a regulation work hood, but I would have recognized her silhouette anywhere. "This is more dangerous," she said without preamble, settling into the narrow space between two shelving units. "The new patrol patterns are more thorough." "I know," I replied, "but I needed to see you again." The admission hung in the air between us like an accusation. Need was not a word Imperial doctrine encouraged. Need implied dependency, weakness, the kind of personal attachment that compromised loyalty to the Emperor. Good citizens wanted only to serve. They needed nothing beyond the opportunity to contribute their labor to the great machine of empire. But I did need her, in ways that went beyond logic or safety or ideological purity. I needed the sound of her voice, the way she looked at the world with eyes that refused to accept that grinding efficiency was the only way to exist. I needed the proof she represented that somewhere beneath the layers of conditioning and control, humanity still survived. "I've been thinking about what you said," Mira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "About your grandfather's stories, about how things used to be." "Those were just stories," I said automatically. "Imperial doctrine teaches us that the current order is optimal for humanity's survival." "But what if it's not?" The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for days. "What if we're not surviving at all, but just dying slowly? What if this isn't life, but just another kind of death?" Such questions were not merely heretical, they were dangerous to even think. The Imperium's vast surveillance networks monitored not just actions, but thoughts, attitudes, the subtle patterns of behavior that indicated ideological contamination. Citizens who asked too many questions about the nature of their existence had a tendency to disappear into re-education facilities or penal colonies. No. But in the darkness of Storage Bay 15, surrounded by the products of our labor and the mechanical hum of automated systems. Her questions felt like the most important words ever spoken. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if things could be different, but I know that when I'm with you, everything feels more real, more alive, like there's something worth preserving in all of this." She moved closer, and I could feel the warmth of her body in the cool air of the storage bay. "Is that enough? Just feeling alive for stolen moments between shifts?" "It has to be," I said. "It's all we have." We stood there in the shadow of the inventory shelves, two small figures dwarfed by the immensity of the hive around us. Above, the servo skulls continued their endless patrol. Beyond the bay walls, millions of people slept in identical Habe units, preparing for another day of identical labor. The great machine of the Imperium ground forward, transforming human lives into resources, dreams into productivity statistics, love into efficiency metrics. But for a few precious minutes, we were more than components in that machine. We were Kale and Mira, two people who had found each other across the vast loneliness of existence and chosen to risk everything for the simple act of being human together. When we parted that night, she kissed my cheek, a brief touch of lips against skin that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but changed everything. It was such a small gesture, barely worth noting in the context of the vast cruelties and endless struggles that defined life in the hive. But it was also an act of profound rebellion, a declaration that despite everything the Imperium had done to strip away our humanity, something essential remained. The third meeting never happened. I arrived at the designated location, another storage facility in the industrial sector, at the agreed time, but Mira did not come. I waited for an hour past the scheduled rendezvous, hidden among the shipping containers and automated loading equipment, before accepting that something had gone wrong. The next morning's shift brought the explanation. Overseer Valdris made an announcement to the workers at Station Gamma 7 during the morning productivity briefing. Mira Castellan had been selected for enhanced screening as part of routine loyalty assessments. She would be temporarily reassigned to different duties while the evaluation was conducted. Enhanced screening. The words sent ice through my veins. Enhanced screening was the bureaucratic euphemism for the process that evaluated citizens whose loyalty scores had dropped below acceptable thresholds. It involved intensive interviews, psychological testing, review of personal associations, and analysis of behavior patterns. Citizens who passed the screening returned to their duties with improved loyalty ratings and enhanced surveillance protocols. Citizens who failed simply disappeared. I maintained my composure through the work shift, performing my duties with mechanical precision while my mind raced through possibilities. Had our meetings been detected? Were the coded messages in the production reports discovered? Had someone reported suspicious behavior? Or was this simply random selection, the kind of bureaucratic lottery that occasionally claimed innocent citizens as part of the Imperium's endless hunger for control? The questions tormented me through 8 hours of assembly line work. During the midday break, I found myself staring at Station Gamma 7, now occupied by a replacement worker who processed quality control data with the same methodical efficiency, but none of Mira's grace. The space felt hollow, emptied of something essential. That evening, instead of returning to my Habe unit, I made my way to the Rust Crown. Yorick was behind the bar as usual, his mechanical arm clicking softly as he cleaned drinking vessels with practiced movements. He looked up when I entered, his human eyes studying my face with the careful attention of someone who had survived decades in the gray spaces of imperial society. "Rough shift?" he asked, setting a cup of fermented grain brew on the bar without being asked. "Enhanced screening," I said quietly. "Someone I knew." Gorik's mechanical eye whirred as it focused on my face. Knew. The question was loaded with implications. Personal relationships were monitored and evaluated as part of loyalty assessments. Citizens who formed inappropriate attachments were considered security risks. When the screening process identified my connection to Mira, I understood I could be next for evaluation. "Work-related interactions only," I quickly replied, offering the safest possible answer. "Quality control coordination." Yurik nodded, his gaze acknowledging the necessary pretense. "Work relationships are important for maintaining productivity," he mused, a practiced platitude. "Nothing wrong with being concerned about a colleague's welfare." We maintained this careful fiction, exchanging hollow words about production quotas and equipment maintenance while I nursed my drink. But as I prepared to leave, Yorick leaned across the worn bar, his voice dropping to a low, quiet tone. "Enhanced screening takes 3 weeks, he informed me. Standard protocol. After that, workers either return to normal duties or receive new assignments. No point in worrying about things beyond your control." 3 weeks. 21 agonizing days of uncertainty, of tormenting myself with questions. Was the woman I loved being systematically broken down by imperial interrogators, or merely shuffled through an indifferent bureaucratic process? 21 days spent meticulously maintaining normal behavior patterns, all while battling the relentless urge to seek information, to ask questions, to commit any act that might connect me to her case. The first week proved to be the most unbearable. Every morning, I woke expecting the summons for my own screening. Every patrol encounter during curfew hours felt drawn out, the questions more incisive and probing. Every servo skull that drifted silently past my workstation seemed to fix me with an accusatory stare. I performed my duties with an almost obsessive precision, ensuring perfect compliance with every regulation, speaking to no one beyond the absolute minimum requirements of workplace communication. Yet, the summons never arrived. Perhaps our clandestine meetings had gone undetected. Or maybe, in the vast churning machinery of imperial surveillance, I was simply not considered significant enough to warrant investigation. Just another manufacturing worker, statistically unlikely to pose any meaningful threat to order and stability. The second week brought a different, more insidious kind of torment. I began to grasp the extent to which my entire existence had been subtly reorganized around the mere possibility of seeing her. The careful timing of my deliveries to Station Gamma 7, the circuitous routes I took through the manufactorum that led me past her workspace, the quiet anticipation that had rendered even the most soul-numbing tasks bearable, fueled by the hope of stolen moments of connection. Without that possibility, work reverted to being purely mechanical, a joyless grind. The assembly lines reclaimed their status as instruments of relentless, grinding repetition. The harsh lighting, once softened by hope, returned to being simply, brutally harsh. Even the taste of corpse starch rations, briefly made tolerable by the memory of shared conversations, turned bitter again as the third week began. I started to understand precisely what Mira had meant when she questioned if we were truly surviving or merely dying slowly. This careful elimination of hope, of connection, of anything that elevated existence beyond mere function, was indeed a form of death. a systematic stripping away of humanity until only productive capacity remained. But then, on the morning of the 22nd day, she was back. I arrived at Station Gamma 7 with the usual morning delivery of materials to find Mira at her accustomed workspace, head bent over her data slate as though she had never left. She looked up as I approached, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met across the sterile space between us. She was changed. The faint warmth that had just begun to bloom in her expression during our brief courtship was utterly gone, replaced by the careful neutrality that now marked citizens who had survived enhanced screening. Her movements were sharper, more precise, almost mechanical. Her responses to workplace communications were exactly what regulations required. Nothing more, nothing less. "Quality control station ready to receive materials," she stated, her voice flat and perfectly professional. "Materials delivered according to schedule," I replied, setting down the crate with an equally mechanical precision. That was all. There were no hidden meanings in the words, no careful, lingering touches during the exchange of data wafers, no furtive glances that suggested anything beyond strict compliance with workplace protocols. She had been returned to us, yes, but the woman who had once dared to ask dangerous questions about the nature of existence was undeniably gone. I understood then, with chilling clarity, what enhanced screening truly accomplished. It wasn't simply a loyalty evaluation that returned citizens to their duties. It was a surgical removal of the very parts of personality that might lead to troublesome thoughts or behaviors. The process meticulously left productive capacity intact while eliminating the human elements that made productivity meaningful in the first place. Mira continued to work at Station Gamma 7 for another month before receiving her new assignment. The transfer orders arrived through routine administrative channels, reassigning her to a manufacturing facility in Hive Secundus on the other side of the continent. It was a standard personnel rotation designed specifically to prevent the formation of the kind of local attachments that might compromise loyalty to the broader imperial structure. On her last day, I delivered materials to her station one final time. She processed the delivery with the same detached, mechanical efficiency she had displayed since her return from screening. But as I prepared to leave, she spoke. "Kyle Thornwick," she said, using my full name for the first time since the screening. Her words were quiet, barely audible above the constant hum and grind of the manufactorum. "I want you to know that I remember everything." To anyone monitoring our brief conversation, it would have sounded like a simple, professional acknowledgement. But I heard the deeper meaning, the message she was risking everything to convey. The screening process had not erased her memories. It had only suppressed her ability to act on the feelings they represented. Somewhere beneath the carefully constructed loyalty protocols, the woman who had dreamed of growing things and questioned the nature of our existence still survived. She couldn't express those feelings, couldn't allow them to influence her behavior, but she had not forgotten. "I remember too," I said, giving the only response I could. That evening, after she had meticulously cleared out her personal effects and submitted her final reports, Mira Castellan disappeared into the vast transport network that would carry her to her new assignment. I watched through the observation windows as the cargo lifter ascended through the hive levels, steadily carrying her away from everything we had so briefly shared. The next morning, her replacement arrived at Station Gamma 7. A young man named Darius, fresh from the educational facilities, eager to prove his worth through unwavering devotion to duty and strict compliance with regulations. He processed quality control data with admirable efficiency and maintained perfect workplace communication protocols. Yet the space where Mira had been remained empty, hollowed out by the absence of something that had never officially existed. That was 6 months ago. I continue to work the deep levels of the manufactorum, delivering materials and maintaining production schedules with mechanical precision. The assembly lines relentlessly churn out their quotas of bolts and fasteners, contributing to the vast construction projects that keep the Imperium functioning. Servo skulls drift silently overhead, recording everything for later analysis. The patrol routes continue their predictable patterns through the corridors and hab blocks. During curfew hours, I sometimes find myself walking past Storage Bay 15, the very place where we once stood together in the shadow of inventory shelves and dared to speak dangerous words about the nature of existence. The space itself is unchanged, still filled with the same products awaiting transport to other sectors of the hive. But it feels different now, haunted by the memory of two people who, for a fleeting time, found each other in the vast loneliness of the Imperial machine. I no longer visit the Rust Crown. The risk-to-benefit calculation no longer makes sense without someone to share the carefully maintained fiction of seeking shelter from atmospheric irregularities. Yorick offers a slight nod when I pass his establishment during shift changes, a silent acknowledgement exchanged between survivors who understand the true price of small comforts in a system designed to eliminate them. But I have not stopped thinking about the questions Mira asked in those precious, stolen moments, about the fundamental difference between survival and a slow, creeping death, about what humanity truly means in a context engineered to strip it away, about whether the tiny rebellions of connection and care are ultimately worth the enormous risks they entail. The answers, I've come to believe, hinge entirely on one's definition of survival. If survival is merely the continuation of biological function within acceptable productivity parameters, then the Imperial system succeeds brilliantly. The hive cities teem with billions of human beings who eat their meager rations, perform their assigned duties, and contribute their labor to the great, unyielding machine of empire. They survive in the most basic, biological sense of the word. But if survival implies something more than mere function, if it necessitates the preservation of the qualities that make existence meaningful rather than simply sustainable, then the picture becomes far more complex. The careful elimination of personal attachments, individual dreams, and the innate human capacity for love might indeed preserve the body, but it does so while killing something essential in the soul. I cannot know what truly happened to Mira Castellan after her transport disappeared into the labyrinthine maze of the hive's upper levels. The personnel records show only that she was successfully reassigned to productive duties in another facility, her loyalty rating restored to acceptable levels through the enhanced screening process. She exists somewhere in the vast, impersonal network of Imperial manufacturing, processing quality control data with the same mechanical precision she demonstrated during her final weeks at Station Gamma 7. But I choose to believe that somewhere beneath the careful conditioning and rigid behavioral protocols, the woman who kissed my cheek in Storage Bay 15 still exists. The part of her that questioned whether grinding efficiency was truly the optimal state of human existence, that dreamed of growing things and tending to life instead of merely maintaining soulless machines, that was brave enough to risk everything for stolen moments of connection. I choose to believe this, Not because I possess any concrete evidence to support it, but because the alternative is utterly unbearable. If love can be surgically removed without leaving any trace, if the capacity for human connection can be eliminated while leaving the rest of a personality intact, then we are not truly human at all. We are simply very sophisticated machines, programmed to mimic humanity while serving functions that require no actual human qualities. The Imperium relentlessly teaches us that such beliefs are dangerous, that hope is a luxury we cannot afford, that love is a weakness that compromises our ability to serve. These lessons are echoed in daily prayers, reinforced in work briefings, and hammered home by the constant presence of surveillance systems that monitor every deviation from optimal behavior patterns. They are, in fact, carved into the very architecture of the hive cities themselves, which are designed to channel human movement and thought toward maximum productivity. But in the deep levels of the manufactorum, where the incessant sound of machinery becomes the very heartbeat of existence, and the harsh, uniform lighting makes everything look precisely the same, small acts of rebellion continue to occur. Workers covertly share extra rations with colleagues who are struggling. They cover for each other when productivity quotas become impossible to meet. They forge and maintain careful friendships that provide comfort without ever crossing the lines that might trigger enhanced screening. These are not grand, defiant gestures against the imperial system. They are tiny, desperate admissions that humanity requires more than mere function to remain meaningful. They are quiet declarations that love, in its various understated forms, is not a luxury, but an absolute necessity for any life truly worth preserving. I understand now that my relationship with Mira was never really about romance in the traditional sense. It was about the profound recognition of shared humanity within a context specifically designed to eliminate such recognition. It was about the irrefutable proof that even under the most oppressive conditions, people will find ways to connect, to care, to maintain the qualities that make existence more than simple survival. The fact that the system detected and ultimately eliminated that connection does not diminish its importance. If anything, the sheer resources devoted to surveillance and control powerfully demonstrate how threatening such connections actually are to a system founded on the reduction of human beings to mere productive functions. Love is dangerous precisely because it reminds people that they are far more than the sum of their labor output. 6 months after Mira's departure, I received a message through the internal communication system. It was buried deep within routine administrative data, a minor adjustment to production schedules that contained an embedded timestamp code. Anyone reviewing the message would have seen only standard bureaucratic information. But that timestamp, decoded according to the private system we had developed during our brief courtship, spelled out a simple, resonant phrase: still remember. She had found a way, despite the enhanced screening, the vast geographical separation, and the constant suffocating surveillance, to communicate across the immense machinery of the imperial system. The message contained no useful information, made no plans for future contact, and suggested no actions that might compromise either of our positions. It was simply proof that memory survives, that the connections forged between human beings leave indelible traces that even the most sophisticated conditioning cannot entirely eliminate. I never responded to that message. The risks were far too great, and the system we had used for communication was undoubtedly being monitored more closely since her screening. But I kept the message. encoding it into my own routine reports as a seemingly meaningless variance in production data, and carried it with me through the endless cycles of shift work and mandatory rest periods. It became a kind of prayer, not to the emperor, who demanded absolute loyalty, but to the stubborn human capacity to find meaning in impossible circumstances. A silent reminder that even in the deepest levels of the hive, where the machinery of empire grinds human lives into mere resources, love continues to bloom in whatever hidden spaces it can find. It manifests in coded messages embedded in work reports, in brief, accidental-seeming touches during the exchange of materials, in shared glances that acknowledge a common humanity across the mechanical precision of the assembly lines. It survives in the interstitial spaces between patrol routes, in the few minutes after curfew when two people can stand together and speak dangerous words about the nature of existence. It is not the grand romance of poetry or popular fiction, with its sweeping gestures and eternal promises. It is something smaller, more desperate, measured in seconds rather than years, sustained by memory rather than presence. But it is real, and it is profoundly human, and it represents something that the Imperium cannot entirely control, despite its vast resources and sophisticated surveillance systems. Those of us who work the deep levels understand this intuitively. We know that our primary value to the system lies solely in our productive capacity. We are maintained, fed, and housed not for our own sake, but for our indispensable contribution to the great machine of empire. We know that personal attachments are constantly monitored and evaluated, that love is officially classified as a potential security risk, and that the very qualities that make us human are systematically eliminated whenever they interfere with efficiency. But we also know that humanity is resilient, that it finds ways to survive in the most unlikely circumstances, that it cannot be entirely reduced to mechanical function without losing something absolutely essential. We know that the tiny acts of connection and care that occur between shifts and around surveillance zones are not distractions from our real purpose, but rather vital affirmations of what our real purpose should be. The work continues. Every morning, the harsh klaxons sound their awakening call. Every day we recite the litany of work with voices that echo off the cold metal ceilings. Every shift, we perform our assigned functions with mechanical precision while servo skulls drift overhead, recording everything for later analysis. But in the spaces between official observation, in the brief moments when the great machine of surveillance blinks or looks elsewhere, we find ways to remember that we are more than the sum of our productive capacity. We find ways to love, even when love is classified as a security risk. Yesterday, I received another message, not through the communication system this time, but physically embedded in a shipment of raw materials from Hive Secundus. It was a small piece of metal, identical to thousands of others in the manufacturing stream, but with microscopic scratches on its surface that formed familiar patterns when examined under magnification. The marks spelled out coordinates, not in the standard imperial measurement system, but in the private code Mira and I had developed during our brief courtship. The numbers referenced a location deep within the storage levels, a maintenance shaft that connected the atmospheric processing systems between different sectors of the hive. I should have reported the anomaly. Standard protocol explicitly required that any irregularity in material shipments be meticulously documented and investigated. The scratches on the metal surface clearly represented potential sabotage, unauthorized modification of Imperial resources, the kind of security breach that demanded immediate attention from the appropriate authorities. Instead, I filed a report indicating that the materials met all quality specifications and distributed them according to standard procedures. The scratched piece of metal disappeared into my personal storage, where it joined the encoded timestamp message as physical proof that human connection survives even the most sophisticated attempts to eliminate it. Tonight, after the shift ends and curfew begins, I will make my way to the coordinates specified in those microscopic scratches. I know the route by heart now. After months of meticulously mapping the patrol patterns and surveillance zones throughout the industrial sectors, I know precisely which corridors are monitored only by automated systems, which access points require biometric authorization, and which maintenance shafts connect different levels without triggering security alerts. The journey will take approximately 47 minutes, navigating through spaces designed for machinery rather than human movement. The atmospheric processing systems create a constant background hum that effectively masks the sound of footsteps, while the service tunnels provide discrete paths between different areas without crossing the main thoroughfares where patrols concentrate their attention. But I also know with a cold certainty that this represents a fundamental escalation in risk. The enhanced screening process that changed Mira was not merely random bureaucratic selection. It was the direct result of accumulated surveillance data indicating suspicious behavior patterns, personal attachments that exceeded acceptable parameters, and activities that strongly suggested divided loyalty. If she has indeed found a way to communicate despite the conditioning, if she has managed to arrange this meeting despite the geographical separation and increased monitoring, then the system has demonstrably failed to achieve its primary objective. The enhanced screening process, designed to surgically remove problematic human qualities while preserving productive capacity, has not eliminated her ability to form forbidden connections. Such a failure, I know, does not go unnoticed indefinitely. The vast surveillance apparatus of the Imperium is meticulously designed to detect anomalies, patterns that suggest systematic problems in the conditioning process. Citizens who demonstrate resistance to behavioral modification represent potential vectors for ideological contamination, security risks that require even more aggressive intervention. By responding to her message, by making my way through the maintenance tunnels to whatever rendezvous she has arranged, I am crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. I am moving from passive resistance to active defiance, from private thoughts to coordinated action. I am becoming exactly the kind of security threat that the system is designed to identify and eliminate. But the alternative is to accept that love can be engineered out of human existence. The alternative is to believe that the qualities that make life meaningful can be removed like defective components in a manufacturing process. The alternative is to acknowledge that we are not really human at all, just sophisticated biological machines designed to serve functions that require no actual humanity. The maintenance shaft specified in the coordinates is located 17 levels below my current position, in a section of the hive that houses the primary atmospheric recycling systems. The air there is noticeably thicker, heavy with the chemical processes that transform waste gases back into breathable atmosphere. The lighting is minimal, designed only to allow maintenance crews to navigate the essential systems. She is waiting when I arrive, standing in the narrow space between massive air filtration units that hum with constant mechanical activity. Her maintenance coveralls are authentic this time, marked with the identification codes of atmospheric systems personnel. Her hair is shorter than I remember, cut in the practical style required for technical work in confined spaces. But her eyes, when she looks up at my approach, contain something that the enhanced screening process was supposed to have eliminated forever. Not the warmth that had begun to develop during our courtship, but something deeper and far more dangerous. A recognition of shared purpose, an acknowledgement of mutual understanding, the kind of profound connection that forms between people who have seen through the comfortable lies that make existence bearable. "I wondered if you would come," she says, her voice nearly lost in the mechanical noise of the filtration systems. "I wondered if you were still capable of arranging it," I reply, settling into the narrow space beside her. "The conditioning process is not perfect," she explains. "It removes the ability to act on certain impulses, but it cannot eliminate the impulses themselves. They remain buried beneath layers of behavioral modification, surfacing in dreams and unguarded moments." "That sounds like a kind of torture," I observe. "It is," she agrees, her gaze steady, "but it is also proof that some things cannot be entirely destroyed, even by the most sophisticated techniques. The part of me that loves you still exists. It simply cannot express itself through normal channels." We stand together in the shadow of the atmospheric processing equipment, two people who have been systematically stripped of the right to human connection, yet who have found each other anyway. Around us, the great machinery of the hive continues its endless cycle of production and control, transforming raw materials into useful products, human lives into productive functions, and love into security risks. "What happens now?" I ask. "Now we face a choice," she says. "We can return to our assigned positions, maintain acceptable behavior patterns, and hope that our accumulated deviations remain below the threshold for additional intervention. We can preserve our physical existence by accepting the elimination of everything that makes that existence meaningful. Or," she pauses, her eyes finding mine, "or we can acknowledge that some things are worth more than mere survival. That love, even when it is classified as dangerous, represents something essential about what human beings are supposed to be. That resistance to dehumanization is not just a personal choice, but a moral obligation." She reaches into her coveralls and withdraws a small device, no larger than my thumb, constructed from components that I recognize as standard manufacturing materials, but assembled in configurations that violate every safety protocol I have ever learned. The device pulses with a soft blue light that seems to sync with the rhythm of my heartbeat. "What is it?" I ask. "A transmission beacon," she explains, her voice firm, "designed to broadcast on frequencies that are not monitored by standard surveillance systems. It can send this simple message, carrying vital coordinates and precise timing data, propagates to similar devices across the vast hive network. A message intended for whom? For others like us. For individuals meticulously processed through enhanced screening, yet who still cling to some innate capacity for human connection. For workers who, against all odds, have realized that the system fails to utterly eradicate the very qualities that render existence meaningful. For citizens who grasp the profound truth that mere survival, devoid of humanity, is no survival at all." The ramifications of her words are truly staggering. She is outlining not merely isolated acts of defiance, but a meticulously organized coordination, a clandestine network of souls who have somehow preserved forbidden bonds, even in the face of the Imperium's most advanced conditioning techniques. It's a silent conspiracy of love, interwoven beneath the oppressive layers of behavioral modification and relentless surveillance protocols. "How many?" I finally managed to ask. "More than you might expect," she replies. "Fewer than we desperately need." The Imperium's enhanced screening process, ironically, forges a populace of citizens who acutely recall what has been stripped away. They bear the deep psychological scars of systematic dehumanization. Some inevitably buckle under the immense pressure, embracing the eradication of their humanity as the steep price for continued existence. But others, against all odds, discover avenues for defiance, finding ways to nurture connections that should, by all imperial design, no longer be conceivable. And what do these fragile connections truly accomplish, I press? What meaningful impact can a mere network of love possibly achieve against the relentless machinery of an empire? Perhaps nothing at all, she concedes softly. Perhaps we are merely prolonging our own suffering, weaving intricate justifications for hope in a world that has systematically obliterated every rational basis for it. Perhaps our very resistance is nothing more than an unwitting collaboration with our own inevitable destruction. She pauses, her gaze settling on the device in her hands with the profound attention of someone who fully comprehends its true, momentous significance. But then again, she muses, perhaps the sheer act of resistance itself holds more weight than any practical consequences. Perhaps the mere preservation of human connection, even amidst the most impossible circumstances, embodies an intrinsic value, regardless of whether it ever attains strategic objectives. Perhaps love is not simply a means to an end, but an ultimate end in itself, inherently worth safeguarding, even when its preservation appears utterly futile. The transmission beacon's blue light now pulses with increased urgency, synchronized with rhythms I instinctively feel but cannot rationally decipher, patterns that resonate with an inexplicable familiarity, bypassing mere analytical thought. All around us, the colossal atmospheric processing systems ceaselessly hum, filtering the recycled air that sustains millions within the hive's immense artificial environment. If I activate this device, she continues, her voice unwavering, if I transmit this signal that will forge our link to the wider network of resistance, we will irrevocably cross a threshold. We will become undeniable, active participants in an act the Imperium will brand as sedition, heresy, a profound treason against the very foundational order of human existence. She pauses, letting the weight of her words settle. And if we don't activate it, then we simply revert to our preordained functions. We will continue to process sterile quality control data, deliver mundane materials, and dutifully recite the hollow daily litanies with voices that echo meaninglessly off metal ceilings. We will preserve our physical shells by acceding to the systematic erosion of our very humanity. We will survive, yes, in the most rudimentary sense, yet simultaneously perish in every single way that truly matters. This choice, when laid bare with such stark clarity, feels almost ludicrous in its extremity. Do we risk absolutely everything for the faint, elusive possibility of meaningful human connection? Or do we passively embrace a guaranteed, albeit hollow, survival in exchange for the systematic eradication of everything that could ever render that survival worthwhile? Do we stake our very lives on the defiant gamble of love, or do we preserve them by irrevocably abandoning love forever. But in that moment, I realized with startling clarity that this is no true choice at all. It is, rather, merely the final, undeniable revelation of decisions we inherently made long ago, perhaps without fully grasping their profound implications. The fundamental choice to prize something far beyond mere function. The unyielding choice to believe that human beings are fundamentally more than sophisticated biological machines. The ultimate choice to love, even when such love is officially branded as the most dangerous heresy. Activate it, I utter, the words resonating with a certainty I hadn't known I possessed. She holds my gaze for a prolonged moment, her eyes scrutinizing my face for some unspoken affirmation, something I could not even begin to articulate. Then, with a decisive movement, she presses a small control surface on the device. The blue light, so recently pulsating with hope, now deepens and shifts to a steady, ominous red glow, suffusing the entire confined space between the colossal filtration units. For what felt like an eternity, perhaps 30 agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing transpired. The transmission beacon maintained its unwavering red glow. The atmospheric processors continued their tireless mechanical humming. The omnipresent surveillance systems persisted in their endless, unseen monitoring of every cavernous space within the hive where human beings might conceivably congregate. Then, from somewhere deep in the distance, other signals began to respond. Not as visible lights, but as intricate patterns rippling through the electronic systems that govern the hive's colossal infrastructure. Tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuations in power consumption began to spell out messages in intricate code. Brief, precise modifications to data streams, carrying vital information between disparate administrative sectors, began to emerge. Microscopic alterations rippled through the ceaseless flow of information that keeps the Imperium's great machine churning. The network was responding, not just in isolated pockets, but throughout the vast industrial levels, in the packed hab blocks, within the deafening manufacturing facilities, across sprawling storage areas, and deep within the labyrinthine transportation hubs. Devices mirroring ours were acknowledging the transmission, a silent chorus of defiance. People who had been systematically stripped of the very right to human connection were, at this moment, brazenly revealing themselves, announcing their stubborn, continued existence despite every calculated effort the system had exerted to eradicate them. How many? I breathed again, my eyes wide, watching the intricate patterns of response proliferate across the various displays. More than I dared to hope, she murmured, her voice tinged with awe. More than should be statistically possible, given the ruthless efficiency of the conditioning process. Enough, perhaps, to suggest that human nature harbors a resilience far greater than the architects of this system ever truly comprehended. But even as the words left her lips, I could discern new, colder patterns emerging within the data streams. These were not the organic, emergent responses of the resistance network, but the systematic, chilling signatures of automated surveillance systems, detecting anomalies in the hive's normal operational parameters. The transmission beacon, for all its sophisticated design, could not conceal the undeniable fact that forbidden communication was now actively occurring. Somewhere within the Imperium's vast, impersonal, computational systems, which monitor every facet of hive operations, critical alerts were undoubtedly being generated. Security protocols were activating with chilling speed. The machinery of control was beginning its relentless counter-response to the detection of organized resistance, deploying the same brutal mechanical precision that defines all Imperial responses to perceived threats. "They know," I stated, the realization a cold knot in my gut. "Yes," she agreed, her expression resolute. "They know." "How much time do we have?" I pressed, a sense of urgency building. "Minutes, perhaps?" "Long enough," she replied, her eyes sweeping over the flickering displays, "long enough to truly understand what we have accomplished." The potent red glow of the transmission beacon was already beginning to wane, its power source rapidly depleting from the monumental effort of coordinating communication across the immense, sprawling distances of the Hive network. Yet, the responses persisted, undiminished. Intricate patterns of acknowledgement and mutual connection continued to ripple across the displays, unveiling the true, astonishing extent of the resistance. They were ubiquitous, present in every sector, on every level, within every conceivable functional area of the Hive's vast operations. From the workers diligently processing food distribution to the technicians meticulously maintaining the transportation systems, from the clerks quietly filing endless administrative reports to the guards stoically patrolling the corridors during curfew hours. All of them harbored some precious fragment of unprocessed humanity, some irreducible capacity for connection that the enhanced screening process, for all its ruthless efficiency, had ultimately failed to eradicate. This, Mira asserted, her gaze fixed on the multiplying patterns of response, an almost reverent satisfaction gracing her features. This is what love truly looks like in the deep levels of the Imperium. Not the fleeting romance, nor the fiery passion, nor the grand theatrical gestures of popular fiction, but rather the stubborn, unyielding refusal to accept that human beings can ever be reduced to mere functional components. The profound, unwavering insistence that connection itself matters more than mere survival, that some sacred things are inherently worth preserving, even when their preservation appears utterly impossible. The unmistakable rhythmic sound of heavy boots echoing on metal grating began to reverberate through the maintenance shaft. Still distant, yes, but approaching with the relentless, practiced precision of professional search patterns. The Arbite's elite response teams had pinpointed our general vicinity and were now conducting systematic, methodical sweeps to ascertain our precise location. "We have perhaps 2 agonizing minutes," she stated, her voice calm despite the encroaching threat, "before they breach this section of the atmospheric processing system." "Do you regret any of it?" she asked, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that pierced through the rising fear. The clandestine meetings, the illicit messages, the immense risk we embraced merely to prove that we still harbored humanity? All of it. The audacious choice to love when love was expressly forbidden. The defiant decision to connect when connection itself was officially classified as profoundly dangerous. The stubborn refusal to accept that survival, utterly devoid of humanity, was a prize worth having. I contemplated her weighty question, the encroaching footsteps of the enforcement teams providing a grim cadence to my thoughts. In 2 minutes, perhaps even less, our ephemeral rebellion would be brutally extinguished. We would undoubtedly be subjected to whatever enhanced screening protocols were specifically reserved for citizens audacious enough to demonstrate active resistance to the conditioning system. The very facets of our personalities that had enabled us to love would be surgically excised with even greater precision and chilling permanence. Assuming, of course, that we survived the process at all. No, I finally declared, my voice firm, looking directly into her eyes. No, I don't regret it. Even if our journey culminates here, even if all we achieved was merely proving that resistance, however brief, was possible, even if love, in the ultimate confrontation, could not truly overcome the vast, impersonal machinery of control, I still do not regret trying. Even though it failed, she prodded softly. And did it truly fail? I countered, sweeping my hand towards the patterns of response still vigorously flickering across the various displays. Look around us. Look at what we have undeniably revealed. Hundreds of people throughout this hive, thousands, perhaps, who clung to some vestige of human connection, despite every systematic effort the system deployed to eliminate it. A vibrant network of love, thriving precariously in the hidden spaces between official observation. A network that will now undoubtedly be systematically dismantled now that it has been exposed. Perhaps, but the profound knowledge that it existed, that such a thing was even possible, that human beings somehow found ways to love even under these crushing conditions, that knowledge can never be eliminated. It will forever become an indelible part of the historical record. Irrefutable proof that resistance occurred, even when all resistance seemed utterly futile. The footsteps were alarmingly closer now, accompanied by the high-pitched electronic hum of scanner equipment, precisely calibrated to detect human presence in confined, hidden spaces. The enforcement teams advanced with chilling, practiced efficiency through the labyrinthine maintenance areas, meticulously adhering to protocols refined over centuries of ruthlessly suppressing precisely this kind of organized resistance. Mira, without a word, reached for my hand, and I clasped hers instantly, without a moment's hesitation. Her skin, warm and tangible against mine, served as a profound reminder of the immediate physical reality that grounded all our abstract discussions of love, resistance, and human nature. For these final precious moments, we transcended being mere symbols or security risks, or even examples of systematic conditioning failure. We were simply Kale and Mira, two souls who had, against all cosmic odds, found each other across the vast, isolating loneliness of existence, and who had unequivocally chosen to risk absolutely everything for the sheer, defiant privilege of being human together. "I love you," she murmured, the words themselves an act of profound rebellion, spoken with defiant tenderness, words that the enhanced screening process was meticulously designed to render utterly impossible. "I love you too," I managed to reply, the raw honesty of the confession heavy in the air, a chilling understanding dawning that this might well be the final moment either of us would ever be capable of such profound feelings. The enforcement teams were now directly at the entrance to our section, their scanner equipment precisely painting our exact position with ominous targeting data. In mere seconds, they would breach the cramped, narrow space between the filtration units, and our brief, beautiful rebellion would be brought to an abrupt end. We would be violently separated, processed, and systematically stripped of the very qualities that had made this impossible moment possible. But for now, in these fleeting, final seconds, we existed as undeniable proof that some truths cannot be entirely eradicated, even by the most sophisticated and pervasive systems of control. We existed as living evidence that love, in its purest form, survives in whatever clandestine spaces it can painstakingly carve out. That human connection defiantly transcends the very machinery engineered to prevent it. That resistance is always possible, even when ultimate victory is not within reach. The red glow of the transmission beacon finally faded into absolute darkness. Its urgent message having been delivered, its power completely exhausted. All around us, the monolithic atmospheric processing systems continued their ceaseless mechanical work, diligently filtering the recycled air that sustained millions within the hive's artificial confines. High above, countless millions of people slept in their identical hab units, unconsciously preparing for yet another day of identical, soul-numbing labor in service to the great, unfeeling machine of empire. But somewhere within that vast, intricate network of human lives, the indelible knowledge now persisted. The understanding that resistance had indeed occurred, that love had, even for a fleeting moment, triumphantly survived, that human beings had, against all odds, forged ways to connect even when connection was savagely forbidden. The memory of what we had achieved here, in this cramped, narrow space between machines, in these stolen moments before the enforcement teams finally arrived. Perhaps, I thought, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the mere preservation of that profound knowledge, that audacious possibility, that irrefutable proof of human resilience, ultimately justifies the immense risks we undertook and the inevitable crushing price we were about to pay. Perhaps love does not require an overt triumph to be inherently worthwhile. It does not need to conquer the machinery of control to serve its essential, vital purpose of eternally reminding us what we are truly fighting to preserve. The footsteps had ceased. The scanner equipment, its analysis complete, emitted a final, definitive beep. The enforcement teams were now poised, preparing to breach our position with the chilling, mechanical precision that characterized all Imperial responses to defiance. In these final, suspended moments, I truly grasped the profound meaning of Mira's earlier words, that some things are inherently worth preserving, even when their preservation appears utterly impossible. Love, I now understood, held its value not because it achieved strategic objectives, nor because it guaranteed happy endings, nor even because it triumphed decisively over adversity. Love was valuable precisely because it represented the irreducible core of what human beings were fundamentally meant to be. It was the essential quality that infused existence with meaning, elevating it beyond mere function. With a sudden, jarring crash, the enforcement teams breached the narrow space between the filtration units. Their formidable weapons were immediately trained on our position with cold, professional competence. Their armor gleamed menacingly under the minimal, flickering lighting of the maintenance area, emblazoned with the stark symbols of Imperial authority and absolute, unthinking obedience to order. But they arrived too late to prevent what had already been irrevocably accomplished. They arrived too late to halt the transmission that had already been sent. Too late to contain the network that had already been revealed. Too late to erase the proof that had already been undeniably established. They arrived to discover two people simply holding hands, dwarfed by the imposing mechanical immensity of the atmospheric processing equipment that kept the hive alive. Two small figures who had audaciously chosen to love when love was forbidden, who had defiantly chosen to connect when connection was classified as profoundly dangerous, who had bravely chosen to remain human when humanity itself was branded a security risk. The enforcement teams, in their cold, calculating efficiency, perceived only the flagrant violation of protocols, the intolerable breach of security that demanded immediate correction. They saw only the glaring failure of conditioning systems, the disconcerting breakdown of surveillance networks, the kind of systematic problem that necessitated an immediate, brutal response. They did not, could not see the profound victory that we had already achieved, simply by existing in that singular moment as irrefutable proof that the human capacity for love transcended any system, however sophisticated, designed to eliminate it. The very last image seared into my consciousness before the shock weapons discharged was Mira's face, briefly, starkly illuminated by the harsh red warning lights of the enforcement team's equipment. Her expression bore no trace of fear, no hint of regret, only a serene, quiet satisfaction. The profound peace of someone who had unreservedly chosen love over mere survival, connection over personal safety, humanity over the relentless, grinding efficiency of the imperial machine. Then, the searing electrical discharge coursed violently through our nervous systems, and consciousness swiftly faded into the cold, mechanical darkness that inexorably awaited all citizens who dared to demonstrate insufficient loyalty to the Imperium's optimal order of existence. But somewhere, deep within the vast, intricate network of the Hive's infrastructure, the subtle patterns of response stubbornly continued to flicker. The irrefutable proof of resistance was even now spreading through clandestine communication channels that the enforcement teams had not yet identified, perhaps would never fully track. The profound knowledge that love had, even briefly, even under the most impossibly harsh circumstances, miraculously survived, was now irrevocably etched into the historical record. A truth that no amount of systematic screening or brutal conditioning could ever entirely erase. And in the deep, cavernous levels of the manufactorum, where the ceaseless roar of machinery became the very heartbeat of existence, and the harsh, ubiquitous lighting rendered everything indistinguishably monotonous. Other workers continued their shifts, now carrying within them the electrifying knowledge that connection is possible. That resistance occurred, that two individuals had somehow found each other across the vast, oppressive loneliness of empire and had, with audacious courage, chosen to risk absolutely everything for the singular privilege of being human together. The dating scene in Hive Tars, a clandestine tapestry woven from coded messages and fleeting, stolen glances, persisted. It was sustained by the indelible memory of what Kale and Mira had accomplished in their brief, defiant rebellion against the systematic eradication of love. It persisted because human beings, no matter the sheer sophistication of the machinery meticulously designed to control them, inherently retain some irreducible, fundamental capacity for the very connections that render existence meaningful. It persisted because love, even when it ostensibly fails, even when it inexorably leads to capture, brutal conditioning, and the surgical removal of the precious qualities that made it possible, still serves as irrefutable proof that some things transcend the vast, oppressive machinery of empire. It persisted because somewhere within the inky darkness between the relentless patrol routes, in those fleeting, overlooked spaces where surveillance systems momentarily blink or are compelled to look elsewhere, people still found daring ways to touch each other's hands and whisper dangerous words about the profound nature of what they were desperately fighting to preserve. And it continued because the alternative, the chilling acceptance that human beings could be reduced to mere productive functions without forfeiting anything essential, represented a surrender that the stubborn, enduring core of humanity adamantly refused to make, no matter how sophisticated the systems designed to force that surrender ultimately became. In the final analysis, perhaps that is the ultimate meaning of love within the deep, unforgiving levels of the Imperium. Not an overt victory over the overwhelming forces of control, nor a triumphant conquest of the vast machinery of dehumanization, but rather the simple, yet impossibly stubborn and profoundly dangerous insistence that connection matters more than mere survival, that some precious things are inherently worth preserving, even when their preservation demands absolutely everything, that human beings are, irrevocably, more than merely the sum of their productive capacity. The enforcement teams, their mission completed, concluded their methodical sweep of the maintenance area, meticulously cataloging evidence and diligently preparing reports that would inevitably justify even further enhanced security protocols across all affected sectors. The great atmospheric processing systems calmly resumed their normal operational parameters, once again filtering the recycled air that sustained millions within the hive's sterile, artificial environment. And yet, somewhere within the vast, cavernous darkness between the hive's countless levels, in those spaces too small, too dangerous, and too insignificant for official observation, the clandestine dating scene quietly endured. It remained hidden, desperate, sustained by the potent forces of memory and hope, and by the indelible knowledge that resistance, even when it fails, proves that some things cannot be entirely eliminated by any system designed to control them. Because in the ultimate analysis, love survives not because it is inherently strong, but because it is utterly necessary. Not because it inevitably triumphs, but because without its presence, mere survival becomes terrifyingly indistinguishable from death itself. Not because it conquers the colossal machinery of empire, but because it persistently reminds us, in stolen, precious moments found between the relentless patrol routes, exactly what we are truly fighting to remain.